Hello, this is Jonathan with Robotis, here on another episode of ROBOTIS Talks. And today I'll be speaking with Evan McMahon, founder and lead developer of Bottango.
Hi, nice to meet everybody. Yeah, great. And excited to talk with you.
I think the best place to start this discussion is a little bit about how you got started in the robotics space. We've spoken before, and I understand that you're not a roboticist by training, right?
Yeah, so Bottango and kind of all the stuff I'm trying to do in that world is really about trying to make the experience of creating animatronics, robotics, and controlling them as intuitive as the world of digital creativity, things like movie and game production, and that's to segue into what you're saying, kind of where I kind of traditionally come from. I've got about 15 years experience in the game development world, and have learned a lot about how creating really artist-centered tools for game development really unlocks the power and the quality of the final product that comes through in the game. So I've always sort of been a lover of animatronics from like theme parks and Disney and Universal and all that world. It's always been something that's really appealed to me. And so when I first started trying to kind of do it and build that kind of product or project as a myself, I was immediately struck with the difference in tooling between what was available for you from a workflow for digital creativity and the kind of traditional game and movie and show and entertainment space, and what was available to someone trying to create what is essentially an entertainment product in the robotic space. So that's where I kind of thought about, what are the things that I would give, if I were developing a tool for a fellow artist in the game world to create emotional responses in the viewer, whether that's, animating a digital character, creating an environment or something, and how would that translate over to the world of robotics? So that has been sort of the kind of nugget of intent with Bottango all along is there's all these really, smart and established and kind of battle hardened workflow ideas and ways of thinking about how to create uh, content and entertainment in the sort of digital world that I felt needed or could have some positive impact and kind of bridging over into the world of robotics in terms of how you create movements and create sequences and create animations or whatever you want to kind of however you want to categorize it that play out instead of on a screen but instead on a robot, an animatronic, or some kind of custom piece of hardware.
So you're a designer by trade, really, right? You work on making the experience as good as possible, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's right. So, yeah, absolutely. I, if I have to put sort of a bucketed title on what I do, I'm a UX designer. A lot of my kind of experience has been sort of understanding sort of what the needs are of the user is and creating the interfaces or experiences or whatever it is that, get to give them what they need and help them kind of experience and have fun getting there. Um, yeah, so a lot of my history has been in creating, uh, interaction design for users, and as well thinking about what kind of tooling as developers we need to create the best experience. So it's kind of all kind of wrapped in creating that right experience for the right audience.
Traditionally, the robotic space is known as something that's a little bit difficult to get into, that our user experience, as you said, it's never been designed for ease of interaction. It's always been functionality first. And I can imagine coming from a more digital space, that was a big transition. Would you mind sharing some of the things that sort of struck you as, wow, this is the way they're still doing things here when you first made that transition?
Yeah, no, great question. And it's interesting. I'll reflect back on sort of that first moment when I first started trying to mess around in the world of building my own robotics and animatronics, and I was sort of struck with. It felt to me a little bit like I was being asked as an animator to create a character and give it, emotion and movement that elicited a reaction in my audience. But the tools I was given felt more like, Python and Excel and less like Blender or Maya or kind of the things that have been figured out as the way that, that we do these things in the entertainment space. Like you said, data focused, right? I think that's sort of the inversion that I sort of have been trying to sort of play with and get back to the way we think about it in entertainment, uh, as opposed to create a set of movements and then sort of, whether that's in code or data or whatever, and sort of see how that comes through. I've been trying to go, a little more intuitive, right? Focus less on the servo values, focus less um, on the points in space, and more kind of grab the pieces that you want and move them to where you want them to be, sort of in a 3D WYSIWYG editor. Um, and and trying to do it in a way that is not just sort of more performance driven and sort of result driven, but also more intuitive and simplifying, right? It's like, as opposed to having to think about, oh, this is, PWM 1100, it's like, okay, well, this is just where I want my arm to be, and all Bottango will figure out the rest. I think that's something as well I've noticed, and I think there's a couple other players like Robotis that are trying to take what is typically a very abstracted out and sort of, you have to know a lot of things, and trying to turn it into something that's more, okay, what do I want to get done, and what are the tools that are available to me that sort of handle a lot of problems for me.
Yeah, in the way that you're sort of solving this problem on the user interface and sort of end the at the end of this pipeline, Robotis is trying to do sort of a similar thing on the hardware and making it a little bit easier to interact with your servos, so that, as you were saying, instead of trying to figure out, I want to make exactly this sweep at exactly this time and turn that into a motion, you instead say, I want to make this motion happen, and then take care of all of the drudgery on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, even things like, as I've sort of gone from the world of stepper motors and hobby servos to spending more time with dynamics actuators and robotics products in general, right? It's like so much of building out creativity and hardware is is sort of like low level problem solving. Like it's like if I was trying to make, again, going back to the analogy of entertainment, it's like if I was trying to create a character animation, I have to also think about, how is this going to be passed from the CPU to the GPU, like all this stuff you usually have to worry about on the sort of dynamics. So on the robotics side, one of the things I really appreciate is so much of that is handled, right? It's like I don't have to worry about, am I supplying the right amount of voltage, am I, how am I connecting these all up? I just kind of plug them in and I tell them where I want them to go and they go, right? Like there's a lot to be said, I think, and this is definitely something, a lesson learned, I think, for sure in the entertainment world, that I think is starting to be learned in the robotics world, of like things that can just be handled for me that I don't have to worry about, and can it go? Maybe I don't have maybe I'm not bare metal programming, but I don't always need to bare metal program when what I really want is just sort of the end result. And as I continue to learn the environment of kind of animatronic control and robotic control, it turns out, there is a lot of the kind of stuff that I was looking for, more focused on sort of industry solutions and professional solutions, and really awesome, really capable stuff. But I think one of the places where Bottango has found its niche is more focusing on sort of on the hobbyist side, or for folks that are coming from a different background, like digital entertainment, or kind of game development, movie development, and looking for stuff that feels familiar.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And we keep coming back to that difference between the entertainment world and the robotics world. And you mentioned previously that you've always had an interest in animatronics and stuff like that. But I'm wondering, what made you make that transition? Why go from your previous work as a UX designer to build something like this, Batango, for an entirely new audience?
I get asked a lot, as somebody with 15 years in game development, and it's a popular field, right? It's a place that people really want to be. How do I get into game development, right? And the number one piece of advice that I always have is just start making games. Don't wait for permission from somebody to do the thing that you're interested in. And if you start making games and you make interesting games, or not even, they don't even have to be good or interesting, just make stuff, you will find that your doors into that world will be much more open than somebody kind of wanting to get in, but not really having anything else besides that desire. So sort of similarly, I've always found the world of sort of themed entertainment and hardware magicry, things happening in the real world, that feel like, you know, not just like a vending machine pushing out a piece of candy, but like something really kind of character driven and real. I always found that really interesting. And, it's similarly a very difficult industry to break into. You can't just wake up one day and say you want to build animatronics for a living. So I followed my own advice a little bit and just started making this stuff myself. Initially it was just for me, and then I sort of felt like the tooling that I developed just for me was mature enough and interesting enough that other people could perhaps find it useful. So I released it out, and I that was at this point it's been almost 5 years that the software has been out and growing and building an audience of sort of like-minded folks that also have wanted to care more about the end result on the robot and less about how they got there. Um, so I think that sort of has been, you know, all journeys are hard to sort of say that they went exactly how you always planned all along, so much as it's been improvisational. But yeah, I think really at the heart of it, this is something that I have found always interesting and just sort of followed my advice to kind of just start doing it and sort of see where that ended up.
Oh, that's an interesting story. Would you mind being able to share a little bit about those first projects you did to see a little bit about where you came from?
Yeah, I find as I've gone through this that I'm a better tool builder than a robot builder. So I partnered more with really clever mechanical engineers. I think I can put stuff together when I need to, but just like in the world of game dev, where I recognize, hey, I can make a 3D model if I have to, but compared to a true 3D artist, wow. First thing I ever did was I took, just like a lawn flamingo, a little plastic lawn flamingo, and I hacked it into parts, and I used uh, hot glue and random pieces of plywood and sort of shoved it together with jelly bean servos. Yeah, and then from there, I've just kind of kept building and building and kind of learning more and more, and started gravitating more towards different kinds of tools. And more recently, have been really trying to figure out how to navigate the world of kind of mass production and working with a kind of really talented animatronic designer to build out some animatronics that folks can sort of build themselves, because that's been one of the big lessons that I've learned just sort of as I've been going through kind of developing Bottango is Bottango makes it really easy to control a robot, but it doesn't make it really easy to have a robot. You know what I mean? Like to actually kind of go out and build one. So also been working on some of the on some kits and products that folks can kind of open the box and have everything they need to sort of experiment and play in this world. Continuing that kind of feeling of making uh, robotics more approachable, more easy, more intuitive, and something that is a thing that people can do that doesn't require multidisciplinary years of study and perfection, and can really sort of examine and play with the art themselves.
Yeah, speaking to that point, that's a similar issue that robotics is trying to tackle. Because, like you mentioned, it might be easy to program a robot, to test a robot. A lot of research and development is going into simulations and things like that to make robots more accessible. But, like you said, that it doesn't make it easier to own a robot. So, being able to
Absolutely.
bring down hardware costs any way you can makes a big, big difference in making it actually accessible. Because,
Not just cost too. I think one of the things about the Dynamixel line of actuators that I really appreciate is, when somebody's first starting out and they come into sort of most of Bottango's community activity happens in our Discord server. And, almost every day somebody comes in and it's like, hey, this has always been interesting to me. I have nowhere to start, no idea. If you kind of give them advice to go down the typical Arduino servo route, right? It's like, you got to understand power supply. You got to understand, circuitry building. You can't just use a breadboard because you're going to, draw more current than a breadboard. All these concepts, right? So I think on the Dynamixel line, one of the things that I really appreciate when, kind of recommending people to investigate that as a starting point is you just kind of open the box and you have a motor you can control. There's very little else like that. You know what I mean? Like without getting into like industrial supplies, like giant servos that also require like CAN bus, like all these things that got to program it. Like I think a need throughout both ends of the experience to continue to develop both the kind of the front end, the sort of the tooling and the actual physical things. Just open a box and have what you need to start to express yourself, and not have to learn Ohm's law in order to do it. You know what I mean?
It sounds like not only have you already built a strong community with Bottango, but I get the feeling that you've got plans for the future. Do you know where you're taking Bottango? Are you continuing to
Yeah,
expand it?
yeah. So there has been this sort of feature, this kind of golden feature that has been in my head since the I wrote the first line of prototype code that eventually turned into what Bottango is, which is what I call performance mode. Right now, everything that exists in Bottango is sort of all about animation and authoring. It's about creating these movements, and it inherits a lot of inspiration from the traditional game or entertainment creation tools like graph editors and keyframes and all that stuff. But at end of the day, right now, the feature set of Bottango creates a series of static uh, animations, right? And now you think about the traditional theme park or kind of animatronic kind of use case, and that fits. Hit play, play, right? Um, what I have been building towards is performance mode. And this is something that I've been working on in its own branch for years now, and I continue to poke at it as I try and take on other initiatives and stuff. And what performance mode is a environment where all of the animations that you authored that previously in previous features could really only just sort of be hit play can be layered together in a state machine where, okay, so I've got, let's say, a breathing animation, okay, and that's sort of one state. And then on another layer, I've got maybe it's tell a joke, right? And so that breathing animation can be layered, and the tell a joke can kind of be, playing on top of that. And then, all of a sudden, some input occurred. Maybe a proximity center was tripped, and the tell a joke animation is interrupted and blended smoothly into a react to sort of a nearby stimulus animation or something. So the inspiration again comes from my experience in game development, where if I have a character that's eating a turkey leg at a table, right? He's an NPC, and he gets interrupted by somebody walking in the door and brandishing their sword. I'm making up an RPG right now. As a game developer, I'm not creating an animation that, okay, this is when it's interrupted here, and this is when it's interrupted here, and this is when it's interrupted here. And I'm also not likely even creating this is what breathing and eating a turkey leg looks like. I'm creating layer one, okay, a generic breathing animation, and a second layer layered on top, an eating a turkey leg animation, and I have a state machine that's running through that. And then if it gets interrupted, right, I have a tool to blend from this turkey leg animation to, surprised by the sword, right? So that it can be interrupted at any point, right? Uh, and again, I think this is something that I have noticed is totally missing from the world, in my opinion, of robotics, is not just sort of creating uh, statement, creating animations with authorial intent that kind of match that entertainment workflow, but also on top of that, being able to dynamically and artist driven change how those animations sort of play through and kind of come together, right? So again, there's so many solved problems from the world of game dev that I think can kind of come over and really help here. So uh, what performance mode I hope will ultimately end up doing is enable a kind of artist and human input driven way of creating dynamic animations and dynamic reactions, right? It's one thing to sort of create this all in Python or some kind of code routine, right? But that doesn't let you get that kind of animation authorial intent into it. Whereas if you could kind of create these as series of animations and really treat robots the way that we would treat an NPC or a game character that has routines and actions and animations that can be dynamically authored, dynamically kind of edited or interrupted or layered or blended. I think it'll unlock some really cool experiences and projects that may not be otherwise possible.
Yeah, it sounds like your path in game design ties into robotics more than one would expect. Are there any other aspects of your previous experience that have sort of matched up so cleanly?
I've sort of found myself being in sort of an inadvertent uh, robotics tutor in some ways, right? Because I do end up getting a lot of folks that want advice on building out projects. And, you know, I think this advice isn't maybe necessarily game dev specific so much as just having built a lot of games. It's taught me to really help focus people in on kind of controlling their appetite for their initial projects, right? I think that's one of the things that I see both in terms of like, I want to build my first game, so I'm starting with an MMO. I want to build my first robot. I'm starting with, some human scale 40 actuator, behemoth, right? Kind of
Yeah.
helping in the same way that I've helped people kind of learn how to build games, like, hey, scale back to maybe start with something kind of more digestible and build up. I think the same lessons apply to the world of robotics, where you know, Bottango tends to make things look easier perhaps sometimes than it is. So, oh, okay, cool, I can animate it. I still need a little bit of help building it. So, you know, let's scale back down to maybe a mouth before we start doing, multi-forward kinematic arm joints.
So, speaking of sort of how tough it can be to get projects off the ground sometimes, I know that you've been working on your own design for educational animatronics kits. And I know that you've been running into a little bit of some delays as it's coming to market, and I wanted to know if you talk about that and share sort of your experience about designing a product essentially from scratch.
Yeah, no, it's been a journey for sure. And, bootstrapping this whole thing, both from the software side and then getting into the sort of physical production, has been a heck of a learning process. But yeah, so basically the path there was I was really feeling that sort of that gap as folks come into the community, get excited about Bottango, and then hit a wall where they're like, well, okay, I feel like there's all these kind of possibilities of kind of creative expression in the hardware world, but just feel so totally lost when it comes to building out the project myself. So I reached out to and partnered with one of the most talented animatronic designers who kind of come through and started using Bottango about building out a kit that would be an animatronic in a box that was sort of had Bottango compatibility through and throughout, as well as some really intuitive tools for helping you put it together and learn how it works and that kind of thing. So we started off with Louis, who is an animatronic bear. And our ambitions were high there, not only kind of lots of points of articulation, but also full silicon cosmetics and stuff. Here, I'll grab his internal mechanisms here. This is uh, a prototype build of Louis. So you can see kind of an interesting kit. Uh, but we've really run into some challenges of trying to come up with a affordable, reproducible, economical silicon manufacturing process that doesn't also involve the kind of tooling that our bootstrapping doesn't, like I can't make a $500,000, steel tooling for it. Um, so Louis continues, and we're continuing to try and solve those problems. But one of the things that we uh, decided to do was like, hey, we started Louis, and we've learned so much through that process of getting things manufactured and made. Is there a sort of parallel product that we could do that sort of serves that goal of having an animatronic in a box, something you can just open and be able to build out and start to play around with creating animatronic movements and art that is really just all of the easy parts of manufacturing Louis and none of the hard parts. And that's where Maxwell came in. So this is Maxwell. He's a parrot. You see, he's a lot more, this is sort of his final look. He's a lot more laser cut than Louis will ultimately be. But yeah, and basically you can put them together. There's this whole elaborate 3D builder program that takes you piece by piece on the process putting together, and then there's a Bottango project ready to go, and you can, basically once you have them built, you're about 5 seconds away from being able to just sort of start grabbing his different points of articulation and creating animations and animating with them. He also has a kind of customizable sticker set that you can kind of create and sort of do your own art on him or kind of follow the fun blue colors that he comes with. But yeah, so we're maybe just a week or two away from final release on that. We've gone through, I think, a pretty successful alpha where we had some Bottango sort of some kind of thoroughly established Bottango users kind of give them a go and put them together and give them a test. And getting really close to what has been at this point almost a 3-year long dream of putting this product out to market, or some kind of product out to market.
I'm really happy it's coming to fruition. It sounds like sort of a similar arc to some of our products, where the important barriers are those first steps when you're designing your first project, things like that. Having a pre-made kit or some sort of framework to start with reduces that gap from of entry from an infinitely wide margin of not knowing where to start to having a clearly defined action plan. And that makes a
Yeah.
huge, huge difference in getting people started.
I mean, I think if anything, that is one of the places where I feel so aligned with Robotis, which is that this is a medium of expression and art that feels so constrained sometimes to require all of these multidisciplinary and sort of just so much legwork for just to get started, right? And um, I think, we've both taken very different sort of focuses on how to solve that problem, but it sort of remains the core problem that I think we're both really interested in, is how do you make creativity and, I mean, I guess Robotis's world is more than just creativity. So it's where I focus in on, but like, how do you make building these physical things more solved and more focused on what the end user is trying to do, and less focused on, you know, the tools that get you there, right? I think there's just so much that can stand in the way that I really appreciate that Robotis has tried to solve, and I think successfully done so. That I think there's a reason why when you look at a lot of, you know, really successful and really high end robotics and animatronics that are really not about, does this prove a paper, and more about, does this do what we want it to do, and kind of create the expression and the experience we want in the end user. They're driven by Dynamixels, right? I mean, it's quite the feather in y'all's cap.
Well, thank you very much for that. Before we head out, did you have any other nuggets of wisdom you'd like to share with the audience today?
This world is becoming more and more approachable every day. I think there's other folks like me, creating Blender plugins and sort of tool sets focusing on the software side. There's companies like Robotis. I want to kind of also shout out Adafruit, that, are just really making this world something that is really approachable, intuitive, and understandable. So if, I guess it's hard for me to totally think that somebody's watching this podcast, but also has never tried themselves to build anything. But,
Yeah,
encourage other folks, if you know them, that this, I think, just even the difference 5 years, 10 years ago, of how approachable some of this stuff is becoming. I think that's really exciting. I think there's been more focus on the user, on the builder, and I think the more we do that as a, I don't know, industry, the more people are going to create really cool stuff.
I definitely agree with you on that point. Evan, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today and for sharing a little bit about your history and your projects. Your pathway is so different than most roboticists, and I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the time. And this has been really fun and really exciting. And I'm super jazzed to see what kind of really cool stuff people are going to make as the world of robots and actuators and animatronics and hobby hardware becomes more and more accessible. It's an exciting time, I think.